lived a miner, a 49er, and his daughter Clementine. All right, looks like we're live. So, Thomas L. Thompson. Who is Thomas L. Thompson? Well, best I can tell, this is a picture of Thomas L. Thompson down here. Friendly looking guy. I'm guessing it's from a few years ago because Thomas L. Thompson is now something like 82 years old. He is, best I can tell, still alive. He's an interesting guy. He's an Old Testament scholar. He is currently living in Denmark. Why do we care about Thomas L. Thompson? Well, thanks to the magic of the internet, we have this guy here. This is his CV, his curriculum vitae. Okay? We need to use the magic of the internet because this is saved on the Wayback Machine. So Thomas L. Thompson, you can see that he was very active as a scholar. So let's see, graduate studies, ancient and Near East and biblical studies. Oxford, 62 to 63, Tübingen, 63 to 71, Temple University, 75, 76. It's that's a 15-year program to get his doctorate. That would have shocked me once upon a time. Before I learned that not everyone has the luxury of the chemistry, biology, physics approach of getting it in 4 or 5 years, 3 if you're ambitious. Some programs it takes 10 or 15 years, like archaeology especially. Now this is, and I say that because in addition to his time at Tübingen, where he spent most of that graduate work time, you'll see here that he was also bouncing around the Middle East, doing research tours. He was spending half of his time in Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon. He was in the shit in a fairly dangerous area. While he was doing all of that research stuff, he was also, where he was an instructor, an assistant professor, a research associate, and so on. Just doing the, the on-the-ground work that grad students always have to do. Now, why am I bringing up Thomas L. Thompson, this Old Testament scholar, okay, who has, been doing a lot of work? Well, the sharp-eyed among you might have noticed something. A couple of gaps, 4 years between Tübingen and Temple when he finally earned his PhD. You'll also notice a much more significant gap, namely his research trip in 1974, and then his next research trip was in 1985. And down here we have yet another gap. Research associate at Tübingen from 69 to 76, Biblical Association's annual professor, École Biblique in Jerusalem, 1985. So something happened that really fucked up his career. Okay. Basically, at about the time he earned his doctorate, something happened that dropped a bomb on his career and made him take this 10-year break. And it was, there could have been a lot of things, death in the family, serious illness. It wasn't any of those things. But for about 10 years there, 10 or 15 years, he was radioactive. He was not doing work in, his Old Testament studies. He wasn't trawling through archives or doing any sort of archaeological work or anything like that. Instead, he was living in North Carolina, working as a high school history teacher, as a house painter, as a janitor. It must have been a very difficult, very frustrating time of his life. Cannot imagine. So what was it? What did he do? Well, he tried to publish his dissertation to earn his doctorate. He presented it before the Catholic board there at Tübingen University, and they rejected it. He considered taking it before the Protestant board. He decided not to. I'm guessing he was Catholic, and that was important to him. But he then, published it independently. He said, "Screw you! I mean, I think this is great research," and he got it published. It's hard to get stuff through an academic press, but he got it published. And then Temple University invited him to come in and spend a year, coming up with another dissertation so he could get his doctorate, which is good for them. But and this would have been, fairly controversial. Temple is a, religious institution. And what he published is what made him radioactive. Specifically, what he published was this: The History of the Patriarchal Narratives, The Quest for the Historical Abraham. It was basically what he said was there is no literature, there's no evidence in literature, there's no evidence in archaeology. There's pretty much nothing to say that Abraham was an actual historical figure. In other words, Abraham is a myth. Okay? Now, this was radical. This was, I mean, literally, and it struck at the root of the Abrahamic religions. I mean, he dropped an atomic bomb in the middle of biblical scholarship. As it says here, together with Jan van Setters's Abraham in History and Tradition, this book marked the culmination of a growing current of dissatisfaction in scholarly circles with the then current consensus, or near consensus, on the patriarchal narratives. This consensus could be summarized as the proposal that even if archaeology could not directly confirm the existence of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, these patriarchal narratives had originated in a second millennium BC setting because many personal names, place names, and customs were unique to that era. The view was expressed by blah, blah, blah. Okay. One is forced to the conclusion that the patriarchal narratives authentically reflect social customs at home in the second millennium rather than those of later Israel. Basically, people were saying that, we can't confirm it, but there's truth there. This has been largely replaced by stuff that began with Thompson's work and others, biblical minimalism. Namely, you can't just assume that the Bible is true. You should assume that it's mostly not until you find evidence of it later. Let's see, as it said, what Thompson said, not only has archaeology not proven a single event of the patriarchal traditions to be historical, it has not shown any of the traditions to be likely. The Thompson investigators point out none of the archaeological evidence cited by the dominant scholars of the time actually provided irrefutable proof of the historicity of the patriarchal narratives. So, Albright, Spicer, Cyrus Gordon, these guys, their reputation never really recovered because this is kind of a damning attack and well supported by the evidence. But anyway, this made Thompson unemployable for about a decade, eventually, 10 or 15 years. But eventually he was hired on, very controversially, by the École Biblique there in Jerusalem. And his career recovered from there. He's gone on to do, a lot of publishing since then. He's been, let's see, published The Settlement of Sinai and Negev in the Bronze Age, Settlement of Palestine in the Bronze Age, The Origin and Tradition of Ancient Israel. I mean, he's got, he's done the early history of the Israelite people, written in archaeological sources, the Bible and history, how writers create a past, the mythic past, biblical archaeology, and the myth of Israel. I mean, he's not really particularly shy. Ooh, I hear a cat. And let's see if I can. Okay. So he has not been particularly shy about proposing that the Bible is largely mythical in character rather than historical in character. Let's see, I'm going to not rely on. There we go. Okay. And you can see the cat. Yay. Okay. So I'm going to share the frame with Sasha. Excuse me. So, Thompson, his career took a hit. He has recovered. And not only that, but the work he did has, really changed the landscape. And that the sort of assumption that the Bible is true is no longer dominating the field like it once was. I mean, so why did I want to talk about this? Well, some of you might know I am sort of a fan of the mythicist hypothesis, that there wasn't an historical Jesus. And some of the people, or that there isn't now. If there ever was a guy named Jesus, he has lost to history. He has been completely erased and replaced by Christian mythology, the gospel narrative, essentially. And the people who argue for that, might go into names later, have occasionally said that somebody once proposed, so like, why is the mythicist hypothesis not taken seriously? It should be. And one of the reasons they argue that people don't give it more attention and support is because if they did, it would destroy their careers if they, had actual employment. And they cite as evidence that somebody proposing Moses didn't exist destroyed his career. I did some search on that. I could not find anyone who had proposed that Moses didn't exist whose career was imploded by it, but I did find Thomas L. Thompson, whose career was destroyed not by arguing that Moses was a myth, but that Abraham was a myth. And it's unarguable that it did. 10 years not doing not following his actual profession. So there are a couple of lessons I think we can take away from Thompson's suffering, his 10 years in the desert, as it were. And now here comes a puppy. First up, this scholarship isn't making it to the general public. What are you doing to that cat, Puppadoo? Come here. All right. This scholarship is not making it out to the public at large. Although now it is, well established amongst biblical scholarship, Old Testament scholarship at least, that the patriarchs, basically the books of Genesis and Exodus are mythology, that they are completely unsupported by any archaeological or literature evidence. No evidence outside the Bible for any of this stuff. There was no exile in Egypt or anything like that. That the Hebrew people evolved out of already existing Canaanite tribes. There was no profound conversion, like an instantaneous thing where one person sat down and had dinner with the creator of the universe, right? That they were, a polytheistic tribe, blah, 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 who evolved through henotheism to monolatrism, and then finally monotheism, right? Basically, those first two books of the Bible are myth, and this isn't making it to the general public. You ask them, they'll say, yeah, there was probably some Moses type guy. Maybe, the magical stuff didn't happen. Maybe it wasn't 2 or 3 million Jews coming out of Egypt. Maybe it was just a small family group or something like that. Maybe, Abraham didn't have dinner with God, but, there was some guy named Abraham. And that's just not the case. That's completely, or at least, the scholarship says, there's no reason to believe any of this stuff. Anything other than myths and fables. The Genesis is the Brothers Grimm of ancient Israel and Judea. Okay? The other thing is that you can't really trust biblical scholars to be honest. Okay? In science and history and so on, academics often worry about how difficult it is to go against the orthodoxy, to risk your reputation by challenging accepted standards. In religious studies, it's literally challenging orthodoxy, correct belief. A lot of these biblical scholars are employed at religious institutions that require you to sign a statement of faith. This I believe, this I will always believe, and so on. And thus, it is difficult, if not impossible, for genuine progress to be made. Even at secular institutions where biblical professorships, chairs, endowments, and so on are becoming more rare, it's difficult to challenge the orthodoxy because even though you don't have a statement of faith, you'll upset the donors, the money people, right, who usually do have their religious beliefs and don't like to have them challenged. So generally, actual scholarship for history of these times and places, any sort of real investigation of religious documents is going to have to come from outside the faith. And unfortunately, all of the study of these documents is dominated by people within the faith, which makes it very, very difficult. Interesting little side note. One of the people who ruled that that Thompson wasn't allowed to publish his dissertation. The Catholic faculty, one of his examiners, was none other than Joseph Ratzinger, future Pope Benedict XVI. So, fuck you, Papa Palpatine. All right. So mythicism. I have not actually read any of Thompson's work, but now that I've found him, I kind of want to, because I want people who I can recommend that people read and follow for mythicist stuff, because I think it's an interesting um, a thing. Unfortunately, the people I'm most familiar with, two of them are just fucking toxic, and I absolutely wouldn't recommend anybody read or follow them. One of them sort of got toxic poisoning from his association with them. Those are Robert M. Price, um, just kind of awful all around. He was always, I mean, looking back, he was pretty squiffy racist even before, 2016 and took the mask off. Went full Trump stand. I mean, he went on Dogma Debate with David Smalley and just totally embarrassed himself. I mean, if David Smalley makes you look stupid, I mean, David Smalley. And if you're right wing compared to David Smalley, then holy shit, right? Um, but even more toxic than Price, I think, is Richard Carrier, sex pest. Just skeezy, sketchy dude. Broke the rules at conventions regarding hitting on women there, and so they, I think, in order to avoid um, controversy and publicity around it, just declined to invite him back. And they also, changed, said, we're going to invite people we've never invited before so that it wouldn't be obvious they just weren't inviting Carrier. And when, details about his sketchy behavior started coming out, free thought blogs who were hosting his blog at the time, started looking into it and said, do we want to keep this guy around? Before they could even look into it, he left. And then he decided that his leaving constituted defamation of character on their part, and he sued them. It cost them thousands of dollars in lawyers' fees to finally get rid of that bullshit. So, screw Robert and Price, screw Richard Carrier. The third, the one who got sort of radiation burns from hanging out with them, David Fitzgerald. Um, he doesn't seem toxic to me. He defended Carrier a little bit there at the beginning. I haven't seen him defending Carrier at all recently. I still follow him. He's not a historian like Carrier. He's not a biblical scholar like Price. He's more a popularizer. He's got a fun writing style. I like him, but he's again not an historian or scholar in the same way they are. So I am glad to have found Thompson because I would like to have somebody who I can recommend who isn't toxic like they are, and to somebody who is a well-respected scholar in the field. So that's why I wanted to talk about Thomas Thompson, Thomas, son of Tom. That's come on, that's Bush League. Come on, get a real name. All right. So that's all I really wanted to say about that. All right, I will see you around. Just wanted to ramble for a bit. I am now going to go take the dog for a walk and make sure that he hasn't, licked the cat too much. Bye bye.